The quiet fire of Jasmine Crockett. The air in Washington, D.C., hung heavy with the weight of late summer. The city, with its marble monuments and sprawling avenues, seemed to hum under the August sun. In a small office, tucked away in the Rayburn House office building, Jasmine Crockett sat at her desk, her fingers tracing the edge of a worn leather notebook. The room was modest, filled with the scent of old books and fresh coffee. A single window let in a sliver of light, catching the dust motes that danced lazily in the air. Jasmine's eyes, sharp and thoughtful, lingered on the papers before her: legislative briefs, constituent letters, and a scribbled speech she'd been refining for weeks. She was new to Congress, a freshman representative from Texas with a voice that carried the grit of Dallas and the warmth of her community. At 44, Jasmine had fought her way here. Through courtrooms and campaign trails, her resolve forged in the struggles of those she served. Her office was a sanctuary, a place where she could think, plan, and dream of change. But today, the air felt heavier than usual. A quiet unease settled in her chest. Like a storm gathering on the horizon, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, her braids falling softly against her shoulders. She wore a navy blazer, crisp and professional, but her sneakers bright red. A nod to her roots peeked out beneath the desk. She was a woman who carried both strength and heart, a balance she'd learned to wield like a blade. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A text from a staffer. "You need to see this. Check the news." She frowned, her brow knitting as she opened her laptop. The headline hit her like a gust of cold wind. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries questions freshman rep's strategy in key committee vote. The article, penned by a Beltway insider, suggested that Hakeem, the seasoned leader from New York, had privately expressed doubts about Jasmine's approach to a recent education funding bill. It hinted at a rift, a subtle jab that painted her as unprepared, out of her depth. The words stung, not because they were true, but because they came from someone she'd respected. Someone she'd seen as an ally in the fight for progress. Jasmine closed the laptop gently, her hands steady but her heart racing. She'd faced criticism before: snide comments in courtrooms, dismissive looks in boardrooms, but this felt different. Hakeem was a titan in their party, a man whose speeches could move mountains. His quiet influence shaped the direction of their caucus, and now, it seemed, he was aiming that influence at her. She stood, pacing the small office, her sneakers soft against the carpet. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as she replayed the article in her mind. Outside, the city moved on. A distant siren wailed, and the low hum of traffic drifted through the window. Jasmine stopped at the window, looking out at the Capitol dome in the distance, its white stone glowing under the sun. She thought of her constituents: teachers, struggling to buy classroom supplies, parents working 2 jobs to keep the lights on. She'd promised them change, not just in words but in action. That promise had carried her here, through every door that tried to close in her face. And now, Hakeem's words threatened to undermine that promise, to cast a shadow over her work. She sat back down, her fingers brushing the notebook again. It was filled with notes from late-night strategy sessions, ideas for bills, and quotes from her grandmother, who'd raised her with stories of resilience. "They'll try to dim your light, baby," her grandmother used to say, her voice like warm molasses. "But you shine anyway." Jasmine smiled faintly, the memory grounding her. She wasn't here to play small, to shrink under pressure, but how could she respond without fracturing the unity their party so desperately needed? The problem wasn't just the article. It was the whispers it would spark, the doubts it would plant among her colleagues. Jasmine knew politics was a game of perception as much as policy. A single misstep could linger, a shadow that followed her through every committee meeting, every vote. She needed to address this, not with anger but with clarity. With the same fire that had carried her from Dallas to D.C., she closed her eyes, taking a slow breath, letting the moment settle. The next morning, the House chamber was a sea of murmurs. Representatives milled about, their voices a low hum as they prepared for the day's session. Jasmine walked in, her head high, her red sneakers a quiet rebellion against the polished formality of the room. She felt eyes on her, some curious, some wary. The article had spread like wildfire, its words dissected in group chats and coffee shop conversations. Hakeem was already there, standing near the front, his suit impeccable, his expression unreadable. He was a man who carried authority like a second skin, his voice a steady cadence that commanded attention. Jasmine took her seat, her heart steady but her mind racing. She'd spent the night drafting a response, Not a speech but a statement, something to reclaim her narrative. She'd chosen her words carefully, each one measured to reflect her truth without burning bridges. As the session began, she waited for her moment, her fingers tapping lightly against her notebook. The chamber was warm, the air thick with the scent of wood, polish and anticipation. When the floor opened for brief remarks, Jasmine stood. The room quieted, a ripple of attention spreading as heads turned. She stepped to the podium, her voice clear, deliberate, paced for the slow cadence of her conviction. "Mr. Speaker," she began, her eyes scanning the room, "I rise today not to defend my record but to reaffirm my purpose. I came to this chamber to fight for the people of Texas, for teachers, for families, for children who deserve a chance to dream. My approach may be new, may be bold, but it is rooted in the needs of those I serve." She paused, letting the words settle, her gaze steady. "I respect the leadership of this caucus. I respect the wisdom of those who've walked this path longer than I have, but respect is a two-way street. If there are concerns about my work, I welcome them directly, openly, not through whispers or headlines. We are stronger when we lift each other up, not when we cast shadows." The chamber was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Hakeem sat motionless, his expression still unreadable. But Jasmine saw a flicker in his eyes, something like surprise, maybe respect. She continued, her voice softening but no less firm. "I'm here to build, not to tear down. I'm here to listen, to learn, and to lead in my own way. My door is open. My heart is open. Let's work together, not against each other, for the people who sent us here." She sat, the room exhaling as murmurs resumed. Colleagues nodded, some clapping softly, others exchanging glances. It wasn't a fiery rebuke, not a shout, but a quiet fire statement that carried the weight of her truth. Jasmine felt lighter, as if she'd shed a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. The twist came later that day, in a quiet hallway outside the chamber. Hakeem approached her, his steps measured, his face softer than she'd expected. "Representative Crockett," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. "Can we talk?" They stepped into a small meeting room, the door closing softly behind them. Hakeem sat across from her, his hands folded. "I owe you an apology," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "The article, it wasn't my intent to undermine you. I spoke out of turn, in a private meeting, and it was taken out of context. I should have come to you directly." Jasmine studied him, searching for sincerity. She saw it in the lines of his face, the slight slump of his shoulders. He was human, she reminded herself, not just a titan. "I appreciate that," she said, her voice steady. "But words matter, Hakeem, they ripple. I'm not here to play games or chase headlines. I'm here to work." He nodded, a small smile breaking through. "I see that, and I respect it. You've got fire, Jasmine. We need that. Let's find a way to channel it together." The conversation wasn't long, but it was enough. They talked about the education bill, about strategies to push it forward, about the shared goals that had brought them both to this fight. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, just a quiet step toward understanding. Jasmine felt the knot in her chest loosen, replaced by a cautious hope. That evening, back in her office, Jasmine stood at the window again. The Capitol dome now lit against the twilight sky. The city was quieter now, the streets emptying as the day faded. She thought of her grandmother's words, of the light she'd refused to let dim, the article, the whispers, the doubts they hadn't broken her. They'd reminded her of her strength, of the fire that burned steady within her. She picked up her notebook, flipping to a new page. She wrote a single line, "Shine anyway." Then she closed the book, her heart full, her resolve unshaken. Tomorrow, she'd return to the chamber, to the fight, to the work that mattered. She'd carry her light, not just for herself but for those who believed in her, for the people who'd sent her here. And she'd do it, her way, bold, steady, and unapologetically Jasmine. The office was quiet now, the only sound the soft hum of the city beyond the window. Jasmine turned off the light, her sneakers silent as she stepped into the hallway. The storm had passed, and she was still standing, her fire burning brighter than ever.